This is the Marketing Agency Power Hour, and I'm your host, Cal Wilder. Each week, we'll power through discussions on business challenges, success stories, and game-changing strategies. This show is sponsored by SmartBooks, provider of bookkeeping and accounting for marketing agencies. Let's get started. So I'm very intrigued to talk to today's guest. As you'll come to see, she's built something very impressive, yet has taken a little bit of a different approach. She's a marketing leader, an entrepreneur, a board member, and a best-selling author. She's a marketing strategist recognized for her expertise on marketing advanced science, engineering, and technology. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, CNBC, Entrepreneur, and Composites World, among others. She's the author of The Giant's Ladder, the science professional's blueprint for marketing success. She's a director of the Main Venture Fund, and she's the CEO and founder of High Touch Group. Elizabeth Chabe, welcome to the show.
Hi, good to see you.
So, what is the single most powerful strategy for success in your firm these days?
I love this question. What a great way to kick this off. I don't know if it's my advice, but it is my strategy. So it's not original to me, but I've used it, and the clients I work with who haven't done this yet, I also advise them to go down this path. And it's essentially what High Touch does. But essentially, the most powerful strategy we have is to position your agency narrowly. And by that, I mean, don't try to be everything to everybody. Position yourself within a specific niche where you can really have strong impact and truly demonstrate that impact. And honestly, that's perhaps the best business decision that I ever made, was making sure that I positioned myself and my firm quite narrowly.
So, what is the niche that you've positioned your firm in?
Sure. So High Touch Group is we specialize in science marketing. So we work with science organizations, both nonprofit research organizations, as well as companies usually that have received some funding. They're on their Series A or Series B, or they're a mom and pop company that is positioning for acquisition. Or some other sort of exit. We're typically brought in to essentially be the marketing strategy or business strategy firm that's advising the C teams on go to market if it's a new company, new product, maybe go to market if it's an existing product, but launching into new markets and that they believe this is really going to position their company for extreme growth, or they're gearing up for their next raise in the next 6 to 12 months and they need to hit certain milestones in terms of sales, or they believe they do before they need to start raising. In our particular niches are med tech, specifically diagnostics, biotech, specifically novel vaccine delivery systems, and clean tech, which is typically had a focus on specific applications within renewables technologies, and then some robotics and automation. Once in a while, we have ventured into my old space, which is advanced materials as well, which is always a fun one when that happens. But our particular verticals are pretty niche, which means our complete agency team specializes within those niches. So we have strategists in these different areas, account managers in these areas. Our creative team has worked in these areas for a long time, and so on.
Have you always had this niche focus since you started the firm?
No, we knew that we were always going to work with science organizations. We started out working with, as most agencies do, working with your clients where you had connections. So maybe it's your first, 5 to 10 accounts. They're based on the personal relationships, the professional network of the agency principal. So in this case, it's myself, or other KOLs, account managers, and so on. I'll be honest, we tried hiring account managers who promised bringing book of business, all these different things. Nothing really fit until we found our niche positioning. Before that, we were kind of broadly aiming in different categories across biotech, across advanced materials, and med tech, and a couple of other areas until we really narrowed. And by narrowing, not only do we have a better understanding of who our prospects are, but of course, we have much deeper experience within those prospects markets that they're serving. We just understand them so much better. So when we are walking in the door to pitch, when that happens, we understand who the market players are. We know who their competitors are. We know, the IP that they're competing against. We understand a bit about their business, and we probably already know everybody in the room either directly or indirectly because of that. So finding our niche has been a really powerful change agent for our agency.
So you've got some background you mentioned in advanced materials in the science space, but I'm curious how you went about kind of building or rebuilding a firm that collectively, had that expertise across everybody in the firm. What was that
Yeah.
process like?
Yeah, so we hire really for best fit with the company. So very often, what I have found is that maybe I have a couple of positions open, and I find, or maybe I don't have something open at the moment, but I end up working with somebody or meeting them in the field in some other way that who really has the right thought process, meaning they look at problems that are business problems for our customer set or for this market from a position of authority because they have some deep expertise within the market themselves, maybe because they were a bench scientist developing in the space, maybe they took their shot at entrepreneurship within the space, maybe they've been in business development or some other very cross-functional role within a couple of organizations within the space, but they have expertise that we don't necessarily have internal or that we need augmented. And so very often yeah, I have a graphic designer position open. I know it's not exactly the right fit for you, but that's the position I've got on the bus right now. And we've made a number of hires that way. And what typically ends up happening is they might be a better fit for a market intelligence team or account management or something eventually. But we bring them in when we have an opening because we want the right people on the bus. So not everybody starts with every single client vertical, of course. We hire within those verticals, and those are the teams that serve the appropriate accounts.
And so of your people, how many of them are kind of scientists by background?
Yeah, a good percentage are scientists by background. Alternatively, they've worked in science organizations for a long time. So, for example, they have maybe solved a defined problem for a science organization that's similar to the sorts of problems that we have. So, very often, this might be they've led up commercialization strategy within a diagnostics org, and they've been in a specific market like gastrointestinal tests or something like that. We know that we need to enter that market as well, and so we bring in expertise that's really specialized there. So they're not necessarily scientists all the time by training, but they've always got the background that's highly applicable to science organizations.
How long did it take you to make that transition from being a more generalist agency to being very focused on these verticals?
About 3 years, about 3 years. And I say that because I think we're always shifting a little bit, as we tighten our positioning over time as the market changes. I mean, I'll give you a great example. We weren't involved in space tech directly about 3 years ago, and so that was a new area for us about 3 years ago. Now we're increasingly involved in the space tech field, and I think that's because we've been very responsive to how that market is growing and shifting, as opposed to just talking about the new AI tool our marketing agency is using or some new part of our tech stack. It's not that value that we're providing to our clients. It's value of market knowledge, market entry potential, the commercialization strategies that we're building for their peers in the space. And so there's a lot of word of mouth happening that's supporting our business. So I say 3 years probably to go from, hey, we're a full service marketing agency that works with all science organizations to we're targeting these specific niches because we know we can solve problems for them and have real impact. That took about 3 years, but we're always sort of shifting and adapting as we see new market opportunities that have strong overlap with our niche.
So if there's an agency owner listening to this right now who has kind of a generalist approach, not focused on particular industries, but they're listening to you and they've listened to other guests who focus on different niches and are having success with that narrow positioning, what advice would you give them about how to pivot their firm to successfully, capitalize on a more narrow market?
I think that your positioning is so central to a successful agency. And if you were to do some sort of study of successful agencies and unsuccessful ones, I would hypothesize and I think I am right that the ones that don't have a niche and they don't have strong positioning are much more likely to fail. Than those that are opportunistic. And this is because your positioning falls not just to uh, who you target as a prospective client. And it doesn't just mean you're able to deliver better work within a particular market or within a particular, technology space, but it affects your pricing. It affects your staff. It affects how you market your company. It affects how you sell your company, what sort of sales model you're using. It affects client quality. And then ultimately, of course, it affects margins. So what I mean by narrow positioning isn't necessarily, go after one industry at a time or something like that. That's ended up being what it was for us. We have very specific segments within specific industries who we work with, and that worked for us. But within that space, because of the needs of those particular clients, we're doing certain consulting practices and we are offering very specific services that serve those client sets well. So what'll end up happening for us, we went sort of industry segments within those industries services. For others, it might be narrowing your service offering. But what I mean is service specific audience, solve a very specific problem, and then deliver that in a very disciplined way using that positioning that you've crafted for yourself.
What are the implications then for, go to market with marketing and sales once you adopt that more narrow focus?
Well, I would argue that you are going to be able to, for example, generate leads in a much more reliable fashion. Your sales model becomes a little bit more specific to your agency. I don't know how much, I know this is a marketing power hour, so I don't know how much you talk about sales as well. But, I think that the sales piece is also very important, right? Because different types of agencies are going to have different sales models that are better or worse based on better or worse aligned to your positioning. So for us at High Touch, we have a very consultative and team-based sales model, which works very well in the type of industry that we serve and with our positioning, because that's very much like the product we sell is very consultative. And so for us, that's what we found that works. For others, it might just be by narrowing your positioning, you better understand your marketing. You have more cohesive, story based marketing materials and sales materials for those teams. And so everything that you're communicating out to prospective clients is more aligned. So let's say you have a sales team with several different hires, and they don't necessarily come with a book of business. They're here to just pitch and sell for you. By narrowing your positioning, you give them a much better shot because they now know better how to sell your company, how it's differentiated versus the competitor set, who they should be targeting, and how they should be messaging to them. So higher margins, I think it also means less client drama, quite honestly, right? I mean, if you're a better fit for clients, it just makes sense that they're going to be with you for longer and hopefully churn a little bit less.
Right. From a lead generation perspective, what changed with that? How you kind of came across the opportunities? I understand there are benefits to being able to, conduct the sales process in a more targeted and knowledgeable and authoritative way, right? But talk to me about how the change of how the initial leads get generated.
Yeah, so for us, we typically because we so just for a little bit of background, High Touch Group is very specifically designed to be a niche agency, which means we have between 12 and 15 retainer accounts per year, maybe a couple of projects if something interests us, but very specifically, we do a lot of targeting and prospecting. To fill those slots when we need to fill them, we have a list of companies that are developing interesting technology who we want to work with because we think we could do good work for them. So we have a list of, I would call them sort of like prospects. They're people we're talking to because we're interested in their tech. But that lead list for us at this point is 3 years deep. And so we're not going to be able to onboard all of those companies at any one time. Now, that's a little bit unique because of the intersection of industries that we sort of sit within and the types of services that we offer. But I would argue that a good salesperson is doing very similar types of prospecting for your agency all the time. So you're not just relying on leads coming into your website because you wrote a blog article. I think that mode of marketing, if it ever worked, is quite dead. And if people are still relying on that mode, I think they need to certainly change tactics a little bit. But I think that active prospecting is so important. And I would say that that's even more important than lead generation. I would also argue that, you can buy leads, you can buy them, you can buy website traffic, you can get all of these things. But these prospects that you as principal, if you're a smaller agency or your sales team, if you have a sales structure, find who are directly in line with your positioning is far more valuable than somebody who signed up for your newsletter on your website. Because what you're offering those people who signed up on your newsletter is very different from what a prospect, what a salesperson who's put some thought behind prospecting can offer to that prospect. So I would say that a big part of that means that you're prospecting actively as opposed to passively waiting on leads to come to you, which is what a lot of people think of when they think lead generation, right? Just as a kind of an aside there as well, I think that you end up with better positioning. The cold leads that do come into your site or warm leads that come into you that way through your content marketing, through, subscribing to your newsletter, following you on LinkedIn or what have you, uh, tend to be more aligned with your organization and a better fit just because they're filtering themselves out. And so I think a lot of agencies kind of are afraid of narrowing their position too narrowly because they are worried that all these leads are going to come to them and think, oh no, I'm not a prospect for them. Well, they shouldn't be probably. They're probably spending a lot of time trying to sell to people who are really relevant to your business. So when we're trying to sell to somebody, it's because we really want to work with them genuinely and we believe we're the best fit to solve some big challenges that they're facing. They're not just another number in my books.
I mean, it seems scary to turn away business that wants to work with you, right? So when you did that transition, were you able to like pull the rabbit out of the hat and like magically maintain steady up into the right revenue trends when you were narrowing the focus, or did you go through a period where, business dipped because you started turning away general opportunities before you had enough focused opportunities to replace them?
No, so it's kind of interesting. So our growth has kind of always been up and to the right, and we benefited in a couple of ways because we're in diagnostics, meaning mostly point of care diagnostics, some clinical and some patients or at home use type diagnostics. So during the COVID pandemic, a lot of our clients in that space were having a boom because they were developing novel diagnostic tests and selling them into different markets. And we supported a lot of their efforts. After the COVID boom, those same companies who had, maybe built out manufacturing space or these other things to support the COVID pandemic found themselves needing to fill that manufacturing space with other projects. So, for business consulting firms like ours with a narrow focus, we've really had some interesting industry problems that we've had to help our clients solve over the last few years. Some that sort of benefited us because they have created markets for us essentially. But we haven't, what really actually what we ended up turning down for business is client size. So we had a sizable number of accounts who were a little too small for us. So meaning maybe they had gotten some seed funding or their Series A funding, but they hadn't found product market fit. Maybe they were doing something in biotech, but it was very far outside of sort of our bread and butter of accounts at that point where we had a lot of understanding. And we were just no longer the right fit for some of those small accounts. Did it hurt bottom line? Not really, because we kind of traded up to larger accounts that gave my team a better utilization rate, and that we were able to bill at a higher dollar amount per FTE assigned to those accounts. So I'm sure we'll get into metrics a little bit, but that's one that I track a lot, which is total billings per FTE, and that particular time period for us, we were kind of trading up, if that makes sense. And we kind of stopped servicing the lower end of the market. And that was a big reason why I wrote the Giant's Ladder, was to have some way to service those early stage founders who need some support on the product market fit side, but aren't really the right fit for a marketing agency per se, and didn't really need like the full firepower of my team behind them at that stage.
Very cool. So I have an affinity for a lot of the kinds of clients that you work with. So,
Cool.
working at, finance these days, but my undergraduate degree is in biology and chemistry, and I came very close to going to medical school back in the day. So I may ask you a couple of random questions. So I keep hearing about these liquid biopsy diagnostics to replace all these invasive tests for cancer detection. Do you work with any of the liquid biopsy companies?
We don't. I think that there's some interesting movement there, but that's not an area that we do a lot of work in currently. We don't currently work with any clients in the oncology space, very specifically. We do a lot of work with low and middle income countries, developing rapid tests for infectious diseases. We do a lot of work with point of care testing companies that have platform plays. That have platforms that they're marketing that other people are developing tests on, or that they're developing tests on. And we do a lot of work in a couple of other kind of niche areas, like some technology that aids, that underlies some of those tests. So these days on diagnostics, it's a lot of that work. We haven't been doing a lot in the oncology space specifically for reasons.
Cool.
But well, actually, but I have a question for you. Why liquid biopsy diagnostics? When you were considering med school, were you interested in any of the benchtop science stuff? Were you thinking oncology maybe as a direction for you as a clinician?
Well, I found oncology very depressing, so I don't think I would have gone into that. I mean, we spent decades trying to fight this war on cancer, and we're not haven't made much of any progress at all. And it's cancer is such a depressing disease. It'd be cool to cure it, but I was more into kind of the sports medicine side of things if I had gone through with it,
Oh,
most likely, but
interesting.
who knows? Hypothetical. I'm,
Interesting.
I'm 49 years old, so I'm talking about a decision I made, more than 25 years ago.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if for people who are thinking about the liquid biopsy space or oncology in general, of course, it's a huge and growing market. There's a surge in cancer incidents, and combine that with, the patient demand for non-invasive options. And I think there's a lot of really interesting activity going on in the liquid biopsy diagnostics market. So I hope there are people who at least get interested in going and working for some of those companies, maybe.
Yeah. So I think about the cost benefit, and a lot of times with these invasive diagnostic procedures, everybody's focused on the benefit. Well, we could detect something, but you kind of ignore the risks. What could go wrong during the procedure? What could the procedure cause years down the road? Yeah, maybe there's some benefit up front, but the probability is pretty low that you actually find something. And what's the probability you get some side effects? And the side effects tend to get ignored. And so that's what excites me about the liquid biopsy. You draw some blood, and if you can develop these tests accurately to be sensitive and accurate, then it kind of opens up, I think, a much lower risk way of early diagnosis.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's important because the piece for people who don't know this market, if you combine a liquid biopsy with very targeted therapies, it does give us an edge in catching and tracking, and hopefully curing cancer earlier and more precisely. I think one of the things people don't necessarily understand if they're not in medicine or they didn't consider a career in medicine is that cancer isn't one disease, it's thousands. It's as unique as the individual cancer patient. And so one person's lung cancer might respond to a drug that another person's doesn't, and tumors can mutate mid treatments. And so, one of the reasons why I'm really passionate about diagnostics, and I heard a little bit of passion behind this oncology question from you, I think, if we're able to diagnose sooner, then we can treat sooner. And that's when you start to see survivability chances just increase dramatically, especially with things like childhood leukemia. Um, and so I think, even if we're turning cancer into a chronic condition as opposed to a terminal condition, I think that that's progress, and we are seeing some of that. But a huge key is going to be early diagnosis. So I hope these liquid biopsy companies keep innovating and we see more there.
Definitely. So we've been talking about kind of what you do for clients and how you position your firm for success, but we haven't really defined how do you view and measure success for your firm? Is it, growth? Is it profitability? Is it work-life balance? Is it something specific you deliver for clients? How do you go about, how do you define success for your firm?
I love that question too. So I care about impact. So we work with specific accounts because we believe we can make impact there. And what I mean is, every business has certain goals, and those goals typically have some sort of financial piece. But the companies we're working with often also have a really interesting or unique mission, or they're uniquely suited to help us in ours. So our mission is to have a lot of impact within within a couple different sectors that I care deeply about. Climate tech being one, diagnostics being another, space tech being another. And if you were to ask me why those areas, of course, there's the business model decision that we talked about a little bit earlier, that we can service those markets, but we designed High Touch to be able to service those markets specifically because I care about them. And the types of companies that we service also have a mission. And so we're seeking to make impact with those organizations. We can dramatically increase our individual contributor impact if we're working with 12 to 15 very impactful organizations who are really setting ambitious missions, and then meeting them. And so we measure our impact by our clients' growth, as well as other kind of softer metrics that they have. How many thought leadership pieces are our clients getting out into the world that are really, not just, I don't mean thought leadership in a generic marketing sense of the term, but I mean truly the opinions that are unique that they're getting out there. How much IP have they generated that year? Is it IP that has good product market fit yet? Are we aligned there? Are we not aligned there? Are we seeing that product market fit through true traction signals? So there's all sorts of stuff that we're considering when we think about impact, but that's our number one measure, and we see it through those very specific metrics. But then, as the agency principal, of course, I see it kind of in my gut. Did I feel like this was a good year for what we were able to accomplish, and how do we want to push a little bit further next year?
Hmm. So it sounds like you're having a lot of success, but I'm curious you know, What's the biggest challenge you're facing or something you recently had to overcome that was putting that success at risk?
Yeah, I don't know if it puts success at risk necessarily because I do think when you measure with impact, even when there are market changes and maybe a client isn't as prosperous as they wanted to be, that year, and that of course you as their agency wanted to help them be that year, that doesn't necessarily mean that you didn't have impact. Maybe they weren't investing as much in marketing and sales, but they were doing a lot of new product development, and next year's going to be really important for them, and you help them with that product market fit process and go to market planning, and you had impact in a different way. So I think that one of the nice things about measuring based on impact is that when there is a financial headwind, which happens, every business has ups and downs, even if your growth is generally up and to the right. I think you aren't affected in the same way, if that makes sense, at least mentally. I know a lot of agency owners we can struggle at times, especially when we haven't found our positioning and we don't have a steady stream of clients. Things seem great if business development is going well. But I think that as agency owners thinking about other metrics besides, the money coming into your firm or the size, your average client size and so on, is much more important for your mental well-being. And so I'll give you a great example, and I'll give you two different ways I would have handled this. A long time ago, when I was internal science marketing, if there were major changes in the market that were negative, it affected me mentally. I would meditate, I had to do yoga, take up hiking, all sorts of things because I was struggling with how come all of this additional effort isn't necessarily showing in the P&L. And that was at times almost heartbreaking, especially if you have to downsize your team or a colleague's team in sales gets downsized because they're not meeting their numbers. And, in marketing, if you really care, you're kind of responsible for a lot of different parts of an organization from product development. You're nodding your head because I know you hear this from agency owners all the time, but you're responsible for lots of different parts of your organization, if you're internal marketing, that is. And so when your organization is struggling, it can make you feel really bad, just in simple language, because you feel responsible. And so, one thing that I think is just really important is that you measure not just with financial KPIs, but also you find some impact KPIs so that you can look at the world with a glass half full sort of mentality. Because now, the science industry is facing some headwinds. We're seeing the NIH has dramatically cut funding for startups in diagnostics and biotech this year. We're seeing grants not get funded. We're seeing grant funding just be slower to arrive. We're seeing, obviously, both biotech and medtech have been making headlines for not having as much VC activity over the last 6 to 12 months. And so, there are some headwinds there. But I think that, after having been an agency owner through a couple of different market headwinds, it ends up filtering out sort of your agencies that are less well positioned and who aren't able to make the same sort of impact for their clients as you are. So, right now, business is good. I hope that it stays that way. But science funding is taking a cut right now. And I think that that I know that it's certainly affecting my clients, and I'm sure that it'll affect the industry more broadly for the next 3 to 5 years. And so, it's important, I think, for agency owners who maybe they're in different industries than I am. Maybe they haven't been in business as long, so they're not kind of used to having a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C, is to make sure that they have that plan B and plan C so that they don't have that bad feeling when they're looking through their P&L and wondering why they're putting all of this effort into their own marketing and sales, but not seeing that pay off. Have that plan B and plan C so that you're uh, not feeling depressed about your situation. There is a light on the other side.
Hmm. Yeah, listening to you talk, I can really appreciate more and more the importance of having the impact on clients and measuring that as well. Because if you're only working with 12 to 15 clients, that's not a lot of clients, and you're working in a very dynamic space, and some of those are going to be more commercially successful than others, right? Um, but really, you're really tying yourself to the success of your clients and have a lot riding on figuring out how your firm can help your clients become more successful, right?
Exactly. And I think that, the other thing that is important, we haven't, again, talked too much about metrics, although impact, I think, is important. And the reason I'm cagey a little bit about impact is because every agency is going to have different types of impact metrics for their clients. But happy to talk about how that sort of translates into financial efficiency metrics for high touch and how we think about that if you'd like to.
Yeah, let's do that. So how do you go about managing the accounting and finance for your firm?
Yeah, yeah. So, we could start maybe with the KPIs that I look at, and then, we can kind of go deeper into anything. But billings per FTE is probably one of my most important financial efficiency metrics. So, what are my total annual agency fees divided by my total staff count? And, there are different rules of thumb, I think, in the industry for what's good and what's bad. And I don't know if I think that, if you're running your own firm and you've seen your own firm's years of successes and years of failure, and you've been tracking this for a while, or you can go back and calculate it, you can see where you should be for billings per FTE. And that's going to be very different per firm. Numbers that I've heard, and so I'm not disclosing too much of high touches stuff, but numbers I have heard from others who work with a lot of agencies, I do not, say that a good number might be 160K per FTE, all the way up to maybe like 360K per FTE. And that gives you a certain amount of stability as well as growth capital, for the organization.
Yeah, and I tend to reduce that to a multiple, a ratio, so it may be, 3x their wages compared to the revenue they bill and deliver, right? And then so if you depending on the level of the person and everything, more senior people, you might not be able to get as high a multiple on, but the dollars are still pretty big. And then more junior people, you might be able to get a high multiple on if they're good and you can keep utilized.
Yep, yep. All good points. All good points. Yeah, and I mean, another way that we might look at that is, and I'm sure you look at unburdened salary load, so just straight, compensation as a percent of base fees. So that's sort of another way of looking at sort of something similar.
Yeah. So what kind of reports do you get as the principal of the agency that I assume you're not doing much of the book, you're not in the books, you're not in QuickBooks doing any work anymore, but what kind of reports
No.
and information do you get? What do you get on what frequency that helps you feel like you're still on top of the finances of the agency?
Yeah, I mean, so, because we're 12 or 15 accounts and I've been in marketing working like 60 to 80-hour weeks my entire life, it feels like sometimes. I actually do a lot of I know sort of where our accounts are at any one point. So I could probably rattle off pretty close to what our balance sheet looks like, our P&L, like our cash flow each month. Like I can rattle those off pretty well by rote because we're small. If you're an agency with 40 clients, you're obviously not going to be able to do that. So I get a monthly management report package that we use, and obviously I've got my balance sheet, my P&L, and my cash flow statement in there. But what I'm really looking at are some of the calculated metrics. So I look at that billings per FTE. I do look at unburdened salary load. I look at utilization rate, for individual staff. So basically what percentage of my total available hours for my staff are being billed to clients.
So how do you track time tracking? Kind of a hot topic. Some people think it should be done away with, and then other people think it's your single biggest cost, so you need to track it. I'm kind of in the category of thinking it's your biggest cost, so you need to track it. But how do you go about tracking it?
So we use Harvest just very tactically. We use Harvest. We use Asana for project management. The two integrate. We use QuickBooks Online for bookkeeping. Boom, boom, boom. So that nice little stack gives me pretty good reports from a couple of different perspectives, as well as my ops manager, some good reports, right? And I do think it's we don't bill hourly except maybe for some specific project type work. For the most part, we have a value-based contracting model. So our pricing model is a little bit different maybe than an agency that's billing straight hours. But that percentage of total available hours billed to clients is still pretty important to us because I want to make sure that we're fully utilizing the team resources that we have for our different accounts. And I also want to make sure that we're not overutilizing any particular resources. So, of course, we're ballparking with our pooled teams roughly how much of each team is budgeted for different accounts each month. And we kind of look to use this as our gut check. Are we ballparking this correctly? What didn't we think about for July 2025 that we should have thought about in May or June? So it's not like I'm targeting 100% utilization. In fact, I'm targeting more like a 60 to 70% utilization of my team, and just making sure that we're kind of putting things in the right categories. Um, I think some agencies are much more specific. They're a little bit like law firms when it comes to their billing, and we're certainly not like that. In my experience, that takes so much time to actually bill out to your clients that way and reconcile all of that information. And I don't really think that what we provide can be measured straight hourly, and it never has been. And that's why we have more of a value-based contract model. But
Yeah. Some owners who have a similar fixed price billing model, they struggle a little bit with the utilization idea because, on a fixed price, the less time you spend on something, the more profitable it looks on paper. But if you're not spending enough time, you're probably not delivering enough value, and the client's going to start to question what they're getting compared to what they're paying, right? So how do you tackle that issue?
I don't think our clients ever question that because we're so present in a lot
Or
of
you might figure people are actually committing the time to do good work. Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And it is I think again, every agency is different. If you are a pay-per-click ads agency, the level of work that your average employee is doing and the type of work they're doing, I mean, maybe it does lend itself better to hourly because you're really like you have razor thin margins, honestly, if you're selling PPC, right? So, I mean, with different agencies, is going to work differently. But if you are a more of a consulting firm that also does execution, we track utilization because I want to make sure I'm pricing things appropriately, right? I want to make sure that we're utilizing people appropriately. We want to make sure that it's also we do a lot of workload balance projections as well, and we look at and we kind of use the utilization rate to also say, should we be hiring up in a particular area? So I again, we don't use it as strictly as I think a lot of the more hourly focused agencies do, but I do think that it's something important to track.
Right. And tools like Harvest, they have timers. So you open a task, you start working on it, you stop the timer when you're done. There's no reason somebody has to sit down and manually, onerously fill out a timesheet
Right,
anymore. So that's
right.
nice.
Yeah, yep. At the very least, what I tell other agencies who are maybe not time tracking is I just say, go time track, but just maybe keep it to the account. Maybe don't even get to the project level at first. Like get your employees trained to at least do it at the account level, and then do it at the project level after you've integrated it with your project management tool or something like that. So just do things that make it easy for people. But at this point, everybody does it. They've been doing it for years now. They're trained to do it when they onboard, and I think it's an important part of our tracking.
What excites you about the future, Elizabeth?
Oh, good question. Retirement. Okay. No, I think that the fields that we're in are just so exciting right now. I think we're going to see asteroid mining for what we refer to as rare earth and platinum group minerals. I think we're going to see that take off in with this certainly within our lifetimes and probably within the next decade or so. I think that that's really interesting because if we look at the geopolitical landscape and China controlling access to a lot of these right now, I think that's going to be very interesting. I think we're going to see private companies controlling a lot of these resources, much more similar to what we saw in the old oil and gas days. So I think that's really really interesting. I think we're going to see a little bit of a race to get there heating up within the next half decade or so. Climate tech is really interesting, obviously taking a hit right now in the US. But I think that there's going to be a resurgence in the US probably towards the end of this presidential term. And I know that there's certainly a lot of burgeoning interest and funding for climate tech in Europe, Australia, and elsewhere in the world.
What kind of climate tech specifically is on your radar now?
Yeah, carbon capture technology, I think, is some of the most interesting out there and some of potentially the most impactful kind of near term for solving some of our climate challenges. While also mitigating some of the economic impacts that I think more developed countries are sort of concerned about. So I think it's a good sort of meet in the middle sort of compromise that we don't see necessarily in the straight renewable sector where it really is okay, let's trade out so many megawatt hours or gigawatt hours for from one type of technology to another. So I think carbon capture is one of the spaces I'm actively watching.
I actually got to visit a regenerative farm on the way down to
Oh,
vacation with my family. We visited Polyface Farm in Virginia when we
cool.
were on our way down to Dollywood in Tennessee in June. And it's one piece of the puzzle, but the regenerative farming practices capture a lot of carbon in the ground just through
That's true.
running a regenerative farming operation.
It's true. It's true.
So you've alluded to, operating globally or, different countries around the world. You told me when we had our prep call, you've lived in a lot of different places. Where are you joining us from today?
Today I'm joining from outside of Guadalajara, Mexico.
And what brought you there?
I was living in Vietnam during the COVID pandemic. I was there for about 3 years and I loved it. I love Southeast Asia. I can't wait to get back. I'm actually going, I own another company that's based in the Philippines, and I'm going to an Asian team retreat in a couple of weeks in August. So I'm very excited about that. But loved living in Vietnam. But after the pandemic, my husband and I needed to get home to the States to visit people. And at the time, Vietnam, who handled the pandemic incredibly well, by the way, which is one of the reasons we chose to stay there, uh, they had closed the country's borders. So once you left, you couldn't get back in. And so once we made that decision to leave, we knew we weren't going to be able to get back in. We had heard wonderful things about Mexico City, about Guadalajara. We went to Guadalajara and we lived there for about 2 months and loved it. But we were sort of like, maybe we should try Colombia. Maybe we should go somewhere else in South America while we're kind of down here. And we ended up taking a weekend trip about an hour outside of Guadalajara to this little town in the mountains. And we just fell in love with the location, with the atmosphere. I don't mean that literally, the air quality isn't great, but we do get out hiking. My house is nestled right in the foothills of mountains, so I can go outside with my rescue dogs and go on hikes pretty much every day after work. And it's just a beautiful place to live. So lovely. And you told me that you got back from a trip in Jamaica maybe a couple of years ago. Do you make it down to any of these tropical areas very often?
Well, we've got an accounting service office in Jamaica, and so I go there a
Awesome.
couple times a year. I used to do a lot more traveling before my wife and I had kids, and since then, we've been kind of limited to the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic region, places we can do road trips to in the summer, but would like to get back to doing some more international travel again. I was lucky enough, in college, I spent 5 months living in Chile in South America, and we
Cool.
visited a few places in Europe, and my wife really is eager to get back to more adventurous traveling. So
Awesome.
looking forward
Awesome.
to it. But my kids going to high school in the fall, so like to get them going internationally maybe once a year. Um,
Yeah, good age for it.
we're taking Spanish, so I'll just
Ooh,
talk my old Spanish and see if we can get by in Central or South America.
awesome. What a great adventure.
So you grew up in Maine, right? Or you went to college in Maine, I think I remember.
Yeah. Yep, grew up
And
there.
and now you're an international traveler owning and running your own operation. Kind of what were the key milestones? Do you think you would be a business owner, an entrepreneur running your own thing? Kind of what were the key milestones that got you to where you are today?
Yeah, it's a good question. I have always been a little entrepreneurial. I started my first company when I was pretty young and didn't have much success, but started another one and sold it, started another one and sold it. So I was entrepreneurial, but I grew up in the 90s in Maine. And I don't know if it was just where I lived or if it was the culture at the time, but nobody said, oh, you're an entrepreneur, or hey, let's bring you into this entrepreneurship program after school or something like that. Like that sort of thing didn't really exist. So I didn't know that that's what I was. There certainly wasn't support for that in the same way in the small town that I lived in. So I think people just sort of put up with this person who was kind of young and starting businesses and that sort of thing. And I'm very grateful because my grandfather subscribed me to two publications, National Geographic and The Economist, when I was very young. And he used to call me every Sunday and quiz me on what was in the latest issue of The Economist. And he started that when I was about 11 years old. And so I think that really contributed to being able to analyze business cases. He was always investing, and we would talk about business models and things like that. So I don't think we called it entrepreneurship. And I don't think I necessarily thought I was going to be a business owner. I thought I was going to be president of the United States, actually. And that was my dream until I was about 14 or so. And after that, I don't know, a dancer in New York or something. You know how it is when you're a teenager. So anyway, my point is, no, I did not think I was going to own a marketing agency when I was a kid growing up in Maine.
So what what was the spark or the catalyst that got you to start your own agency?
Seeing a problem that needed to be solved. I was internal. I did internal marketing for an academic research lab, and I did internal marketing for another research organization. And I found two things were simultaneously true. They were generating really interesting IP, and they were also not commercializing it very well. And a lot of the scientists who had developed the IP were not the best people to be commercializing it, or they were. They were absolutely the best people to be commercializing it, and they just needed a little bit of support. And so I started High Touch Group with that in mind. How could we commercialize or help commercialize more technology so it doesn't just die in a pitch deck or die once it's patented in your technology transfer office? Obviously, the concept of high touch and the model has evolved a bit since then, but I think just seeing really great tech just not go anywhere, more because the people commercializing it can't get out of their own way, or there's a lot of ego involved. There isn't a lot of fundraising expertise, certainly not a lot of product market fit expertise. And so you would think in these organizations, all of that would exist, and it turns out it doesn't. And so there are science organizations like mine that support them.
You're referring to your time at the Jackson Laboratory?
Yeah, both at the Jackson Laboratory and at the University of Maine's Advanced Structures and Composite Center. Both organizations have amazing tech, and actually, the Composite Center was another impetus for me starting my own business. I had the benefit of working under Dr. Hibby Dagger, the executive director of that organization, and he was just a phenomenal entrepreneur and engineer, phenomenal engineer, and just a real pleasure to work with and to learn from. But I would argue that a lot of technologies coming out of the university didn't have a Habib behind them, getting them commercialized. I mean, he was great at starting spin out companies and all of that. But not everyone can be you know, a vice lab at a Harvard, or a composite center out of UMaine.
Right.
Or maybe they could if they had more support.
So you've accomplished a lot, and you're still pretty young. But if you could go back, you know, when give yourself some advice when you were first starting your agency, what would you tell yourself?
It'll take longer than you think. I think that's probably I think a lot of us who are ambitious, we suffer a little bit from impatience. We think we're ready for things before we are. So I think just learn patience earlier. would be my advice kind of across the board. I think, and I see this in sort of the younger, marketing agencies tend to attract a sort of young and ambitious person, I think, very often because the hours can be long, the work is varied. It can be very interesting work, especially depending on the types of clients that you have. And a lot of people think they're ready before they are. And I was among those people. And so I just sort of caution, learn as much as you can, say yes to all the experiences, and be patient.
That's good advice.
What about you? What advice do you give for people looking to start their own bookkeeping and accounting firm?
Well, I don't know. It's such a competitive space these days. We started SmartBooks 15 years ago when this whole remote accounting and bookkeeping industry was just becoming viable, right? Because before you had, QuickBooks Online, before you had online expense report systems like Expensify, before you had Bill.com, or, now there's a lot of competitors to Bill.com to do online accounts payable management. Like you just couldn't do it remotely effectively. You'd have to looked a lot more like a staffing agency with people driving around from client to client, and that wasn't particularly exciting. I had gone through the transition in the IT services space. The first company I co-founded um, in the year 2000, we went through that migration. It was mostly kind of billable hours on site with clients in their server closets and doing desktop support. And then several years later, it was fixed fee, largely remote managed service, you know, servers were moving into data centers. It was before, Google Workspace and Microsoft Azure. So there was still a fair amount of local IT, but increasingly the servers were moving into data centers and using virtualization technology. And so I felt like there was a similar opportunity in the bookkeeping and accounting space to, develop a remote managed service for small businesses that didn't have the budget for full-time internal accounting teams. And so I guess if I would give someone some advice, think twice about you really want to get into this if you're trying to start
That's
it from
true.
scratch because it's so competitive. And then I'd probably advise, try to find try to find a niche to avoid all the noise in the general marketplace.
I agree. Good advice. Good advice. Somebody very wise and dear to me once said, when I was about 25, he said, move to California. Why aren't you in the Bay Area? I was in Maine at the time working at the Composite Center. And he said, move to the Bay Area. There you're going to get gobbled up by one of these big firms. You're going to have much more P&L responsibility. You're going to be able to play with so much, more interesting tech and startups. And, um, you know, it is a lot more competitive in that market as well. And I thought to myself, do I want to be one of a million people, but I didn't graduate from Harvard, I didn't graduate from Stanford, and so my fight is going to be that much harder? Or do I want to be patient and specialize in something that is more niche, that is a little bit more unique, and that is going to be something that we're going to need in the industry for the next like 10, 15, 20 years. I want to know how you got into how you started an IT business in the year 2000. That seems like the worst year to start an IT business, but it sounds like it went well and you sold it and started SmartBooks.
Yeah, it went well. I think when we're working with small businesses, there's always some percentage of them that are doing just fine, even if the broad economy is having some headwinds, right? And so
Yep.
trying to find those pockets that are still doing well, or when times are tough, people they may not want to make full-time hires, and so kind of fractional outsourcing could be attractive. But I was 22 years old and or 24 years old, and my partners and I were all this kind of the same age, and we're like we didn't know any better. We didn't have families or kids or much by way of living expenses to have to worry about. So it's kind of like we didn't know what we didn't know, and we took the risk. And in hindsight, yeah, I guess it was kind of a risk, but at the time, it didn't seem like it was that risky.
Isn't that a fun time when you just don't know what you don't know, so you
Never.
do what you're passionate about?
And we
Very
started
fun.
SmartBooks in 2009, right? Beginning of the Great Recession, late 2008, early 2009, and
Yeah.
that's worked out okay.
Awesome. Well, good for you. That's awesome.
So what do you like to do outside of work?
I mentioned that I hike. I rescue dogs. I'm big into dog rescue, so I do a lot of fostering and training of dogs, and flight angeling, and organizing adoptions in the U.S. when I can. And I oil paint, and I'm a fine arts photographer, film photography specifically. So I have a lot of hobbies that I hope to be able to spend more time doing at some point.
Are you doing dog rescue work in Mexico now?
Oh yeah, High Touch Group usually supports at least one rescue or nonprofit here each year. And actually, for the Giants Ladder, for people who are interested, if you're thinking about starting a science company, if you buy that book on Amazon or wherever you get your books, all of the proceeds go to a dog rescue charity that we support here in Mexico.
That's near and dear to my heart. As I mentioned, I go to Jamaica on business from time to time, and almost 3 years ago when I was there, I found these three tiny little 5-week-old puppies that had no home, and my family was thinking about getting a dog or two at the time, and we ended up getting those three. I brought them back to the U.S., and now they're great, great family pets.
Oh, love it. What are their names?
So we kind of named them after something related to Jamaica. So one of them is Sunny, one of them is Cocoa, since they grow cocoa as a crop there, and one of them is Ackee, which is the national fruit or plant of Jamaica.
Cool, great names. Love it.
They're a handful. I don't know if I'd recommend them for everybody, but they work. They work for us. We can kind of fairly keep up with them.
Awesome. Love a good dog rescue story.
So, Elizabeth, if folks want to connect with you, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Sure. So I always make this offer on podcasts. If there's somebody listening who's thinking about starting a company and you're in the sciences and you don't have enough money for a book, maybe you have not been successful in pitching, write to inquiries at elizabethchabe.com and someone there will send you a free PDF of the Giants Ladder. We want that to be out there and utilized as much as possible. So please reach out if you can't afford to pick up a copy. Also, pick up a copy and support rescue dogs if you can. Otherwise, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm not really on social media, so maybe like you can find somebody who works for me through my LinkedIn account, I guess. And the other way to get in touch with me, I guess, is through hightouchgroup.com. You can hit the contact us, and that'll get to me eventually. Yeah, I'm really excited to see people out in the field this year. If you happen to be going to ADLM in Chicago next week, I'll be there. I'll be keynoting a couple of conferences this fall. So hoping to see more people out and about in the field.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth, for your time today and your openness to share so much information about your firm, your strategy, a little bit of your life story, how you view partnering with your clients. I've really enjoyed the conversation. And for those listening out there in the audience, if you've learned something today or enjoyed the conversation, please share information. Let people know this podcast exists. Let's get this information in the hands of fellow agency owners and share the information. Thank you again, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
This has been another exciting episode of the Marketing Agency Power Hour. We'll see you all next time. Another episode in the books. Thank you so much for tuning in. For show notes and more, please visit marketingagencypowerhour.com. This show is sponsored by SmartBooks, providing marketing agencies with bookkeeping, accounting, and finance support. With SmartBooks, you gain the clarity and confidence to make your agency a success. Until next time,